Hello everyone, this is Giovanny Panginda and welcome back to a whole new season of the FYI on Youth Ministry. This season is all about how to talk about race with teenagers and with each other. This can be a difficult subject to talk about at times, but it's a needed conversation because today's teenagers are more diverse than ever before, and they're asking all the questions. But before we talk about teenagers, let's hear from them. We asked young people about race, and here's what they had to say.
Okay, I'm Jaylon, and I'm in the 7th grade. Nowadays, there's a lot of multi-ethnic friend groups, and you all are a bit of everything. So I feel like there can be a lot of conflict when it comes to that, because oh, I haven't done that. Oh, wait, what's that about? Can you teach me? So it can be cool sometimes because you're learning about each other and you're learning together, or sometimes it can be not as fun because you're judging each other. So it really just depends, I guess.
I'm Kyler, and I'm 14 years old. You have to watch what you say to any other race, because it could definitely come off as you're kind of racist, but that's true for every race, not just white people. You just have to know the right things to say. Definitely. That can't come off offensive to a different race.
I'm Ava and I'm 17. I think, for people who are white and have that privilege in their life, it's hard to admit that there's things like that. So that can be really tricky. It's hard to talk about because it's important to talk about, but then I don't know what to say.
So my name's Osvaldo Valenzuela. Most people know me as Ozzy, and I am in 10th grade. Most people, when they look at me, they might think that I'm Mexican. And so they may not be wrong. My parents are from Mexico, but people will treat me differently. And I've had interactions with classmates where they tell me, oh, you are this. There is no alternative. I think at church, what my community likes to do is we like to support other communities around us. And in the wake of the past couple of years, my church has definitely read more books about race, and they've had more conversations. Recently, they had an event in East Palo Alto where they were praying for peace with these different Black communities in churches. It's good to always know that we are all connected. It doesn't matter who we are or what we look like.
So I feel like I'm in the presence of celebrities, y'all, because I am in the presence of 3 authors here. To kick off this season, we have the authors of one of FYI's digital resources talking about race with teenagers, a ministry toolkit. We have Jennifer Guerra Aldana.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Gio. Good to be here.
Kat Armas.
I'm so happy to be here. Hi.
And Ahren Martinez.
Hey, Gio. Hey, everyone. Good to be here.
So why don't we just start with a quick introduction question, all right? Are y'all ready? What is something you're working on right now that you are excited about? Or what's something that our listeners might still not know about you?
Ooh, good questions. I would say I am really excited there is a current curriculum that my colleagues and I at Florida Youth Institute, so Caleb and Jane and I, Caleb Bruce, Jane Hong Guzman de Leon, and myself are working on a curriculum for young people. So look for that, January 2023, that precisely talks about how can we help young people have conversations about culture, immigration, and race as it pertains to their discipleship. So I'm stoked about that. And something that I think listeners might not know about me is that I light a candle every time I start work every day. It just sets the mood. So currently rocking volcano scent from Anthropology Candle. Any Anthro fans out there?
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
I'm a fan of lighting a little candle, set the mood for a work day. So.
I like lavender. That's my favorite scent.
Hey, lavender eucalyptus. Those
yeah,
do
exactly.
Magic. Yeah, you just type faster,
And how about you, Kat?
Well, right now I'm actually working on my second book. It's a devotional, which I'm really excited about. We're trying to reclaim the devotional space and offer something different and unique. And so, yeah, I've just been mulling away on that, which has been very, very hard, harder than I thought.
Sure, yeah.
But it's been a lot of fun. So I'm excited about that. And then something that you might not know about me, I'm a huge horror fan. That's what got me through the pandemic.
Okay.
So,
All right.
just
And how about you, Ahren?
Yeah, so I'm excited to be taking our race guide on the road a little bit.
Okay.
To be presenting at the Christian Community Development Association conference this upcoming year in November with Jane Hong Guzman de Leon, doing like a race guide 2.0, if you will, presenting there. So excited about that. And one thing that people may not know about me is I have actually started a comedy writing class. So I'm excited to be kind of doing something I've always been afraid of, but excited to do and start doing some comedy writing.
I'm excited to come watch you.
Me too.
Yes.
And I am learning Korean. My students love Korean dramas and K-pop, and I am into that as well. So I'm trying to learn Korean so I can understand the culture better, and also to learn the language. But speaking of awareness of culture, I think it's significant for our students to talk about this, right? And not just for our students, but for our adults and this country, and the world at large. So throughout this season, we're actually going to draw on your ebook talking about race with teenagers. And in the next episode, we're going to dive deeper into an overview of that guide. But in this episode, we're actually going to take we're going to set the stage for everyone listening here, and provide them some context and relevance for these conversations. So I'm going to ask a couple questions. Jen, why is it biblically important for the church and youth leaders to engage in the conversation, especially with the young people we disciple, but also with each other?
Yeah, what an important thing to talk about and reflect on. What comes to mind is that diversity within race, culture, ethnicity, background, migration stories are very realities that God used to bring us the story of God, to bring us the liberative story of and the movement of Jesus and why we're all here. The reason that Jesus was Jew is really important and makes the encounters with the Samaritan woman, with that theological conversation that they have, the fact that they had history of segregation and borders and wars between them, and then Jesus chose to embrace and have this theological embrace and conversation with her. Him being Jew is actually a really important fact. I think oftentimes we have sanitized our stories in scripture and removed these important layers that help us understand how do then we respond to our own borders, cultures, ethnicities, migration stories. And I always think about also the New Testament. There are 4 accounts, the Synoptic Gospels. So why would there be a need for 4 different accounts of the story, the life, and the passion of Jesus? Well, because different perspectives are important. And every one of these authors had a unique lived experience, a unique social location. And I am so glad we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because we can compare, we can know about Jesus from deeper ways. And so biblically speaking, the Bible is filled with realities of ethnicity, of culture, of immigration, of inclusion, of exclusion, and all have those been realities that God has chosen to enter into. Diversity is something that God created. And so if we don't see them, we actually are not actually seeing the story of God through Scripture. We are seeing just our reality of we just tend to read ourselves into Scripture instead of having Scriptures read us. And when we allow that to happen, I think that's when the Bible becomes transformational for the people of God. Is that when we make God in our image, but when God comes and challenges the images we have made of who God really is. And that happens through Scripture in very powerful ways.
That's beautiful. There's many aspects, right, about the context of our students, volunteers, and church communities that we need to keep in mind as we have these conversations. And one of these aspects is actually about ethnic and racial representation. Okay, so Kat, why does representation matter, and why is it important for leaders to be aware of representation, especially in the resources that they use?
For me, it mattered because as a young student, trying to learn about God and theology and the Bible, I didn't find myself in many of the people who were teaching me about the Bible. As a woman, particularly, most of the folks that were teaching me about God were men, and I was a woman. And so it was very different, relating to the Bible in that way. But also as a Cuban American, with just my own cultural ways of understanding the world, and particularly in the city that I was raised and around the people that I was raised. And so seminary actually made me feel further from God in many ways at first, until I was able to find myself in a context where it was a little different than that. But yeah, so it mattered for me just in general in seeing myself as a theologian and seeing myself in the stories of the Bible. But also just more generally, representation matters because it gives students and it gives people a full view of history, right? We're able to see, just the grand story and not just story told by one specific group of people, but we're able to see the full view of history. Representation also empowers underrepresented students and people, right? It empowers them. We've all heard the quote by Marian Wright, you can't be what you can't see. And so, representation allows us to see ourselves in curriculum, in just different spaces. And it's not just important for individuals, but it's important just for, society as a whole. Those who are exposed to different cultures and different, people and just diversity in general are known to exhibit less racial prejudice, right? And so representation matters for a whole lot of reasons, and I could name more, but I think that it's very important that as leaders that we are intentional and very focused on making sure that the representation is in our curriculums and what we teach and every way that we engage our students.
What is one thing then that leaders can do to be more aware of ethnic representation in their discipleship? Like either when it comes to the resources or especially in their own teaching?
Yeah, I think one important thing is to name the value. And I talk about this actually in an article that I wrote for FYI, but to name it starts with naming the value, right? And honoring the layers of diversity. So you have to know your why and why you're doing this. And you have to know how this is going to affect students in the long run, right? And so naming that why initially, I think is really important. And the value of this, like this is not, you're not just checking something off, just to do it because you have, but no, you have to, this is something that is going to affect students in the long run. And so I think that is a way that we can start. And also just evaluate who's teaching, evaluate, who's teaching what and from what lens, from what perspective, from what culture, and just be very, again, intentional about that. I think those are just two ways to start, what we can do to make sure representation is at the forefront of what we're teaching.
I'm definitely going to take that with me, the why, the who, and the what. I love that. And let's see, in the guide, you all share insights of your experience in youth ministry, as well as some theological education. And you also share personal stories about how race, culture, and immigration and the power it has and the impact it has in your life. Ahren, this question is for you. What is the importance of personal stories when having these conversations? Like, how can we make a safe space for the stories of our students as well as their families?
Our personal stories are so important. Our stories matter. How we got here matters. Our family stories matter. Our lived experiences, everyday lived experiences in our bodies matter. And I think the most important way to establish that safe space for our youth to be able to storytell well is for us to be able to model it well for them and to be able to show them like our excitement and our kind of personal journeys with our own stories and how that got us to where we are today, because I feel like it's really important to know where you've come from in order to know where you're going, in order to just kind of guide your purpose and to truly and fully understand who you are as a person and your journey, your family's journey. I'm a firm believer in my ancestors and our lineage,
Yes.
and what we worked for and what my ancestors worked for in order to get me to where I am now. And I'm forever grateful. And yeah, I think the way that we do that well is we model it for our youth and just really talk about the importance of it to them. And if they don't know that information, if they don't know those stories, encouraging them to speak to their parents, to talk to their elders, to learn the traditions. Why do you do the things that you do in your family? Do you have traditions? Do you have things that you do every year or around holidays? Do you know why you do them? You know, just kind of that healthy curiosity that they can have in order to fully understand themselves better in the world around them.
Yeah.
That's so important, Ahren. And I'd say, like, one of the things that we talked about as we wrote this guide was that sometimes there's a misunderstanding in more Western thought that stories are things you like sprinkle on top. We often have a very limited or narrow, and for me, it's a ironic understanding of story because Bible, our scriptures are oral tradition that got written down, and so our scriptures are stories.
Right.
So stories are not just something we sprinkle or that make us feel good about things, but they're a source of knowledge and wisdom, and they're a source to know who God is among us and who we are together. And so when we share our personal stories, it's not just to fill the time, it's not to make us feel good, but it's deeply a theological task.
Right.
I'm grateful that the Latina immigrant church I grew up with storied me and that it was part of the worship service for people to share their stories. And it wasn't seen as an anecdote to make the point the sermon needed to make or to fill the time or to talk about random stuff. It was, and what have we collectively learned about God and each other because we're listening to this source of knowledge and wisdom from our community. And that's the kind of stories we're talking about in this guide that Ahren was just beautifully talking and elevating because they're so important if we see them in that lens.
They are. And can I just share with you from Dr. Soong-Chan Rah's book, Many Colors, he talks about how important storytelling is. And he gives this like perfect 4-step process on how to storytell well. And he says, number 1, tell the truth. Number 2, reveal yourself, not just facts and figures. Number 3, share pain honestly. It's okay to share feelings. And number 4, share your identity and who you are. And I think that's really powerful, and he says it well.
I love that, especially coming from Soong-Chan Rah. I mean, especially as an Asian male, hearing the words like, it's okay to share your pain.
Right.
I'm like, wait, what? Really?
Yeah.
So, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So how did this book come about?
Yeah. I think it's a fun story to share with you. So happy to share it with my fellow co-authors here and with all of you listening. The intention for a resource like this for our team happened quite a bit ago. But the reality is that we didn't feel like we had the kind of space and capacity and staffing for this kind of project. And so when Kat and with Ahren came on the team, it just felt like God had sent authors and leaders who deeply care about this work and who wanted to work on this. And so that is when we kind of decided, like, we now have the time, the staff, and the capacity to be able to put something like this together. And our team is made up of really incredible leaders, but like anybody knows, if you're in ministry in a nonprofit sector, everybody wears a lot of hats on the team. And so just because we have people on the team doesn't mean they had all this extra capacity for it. And so Ahren, Kat, and I committed to this. And we also recognize, you will see in the first couple of pages, that we recognize that there isn't an Asian American voice, an Indigenous voice. And that was important for us to recognize because in conversations about race, it's about who is in the room, but also who isn't. And we were aware of those layers, and we made sure that we had different Asian Pacific Islander voices, like yours, Gio, at different times to say, hey, we wrote this. Does this track? Are there any gaps in what we are writing? And so we recognize that. But there is also a deep joy personally. I'm so grateful for the work of Dr. Shaniqua Barnes. And she always talks about how when we have conversations about diversity and reconciliation and race, the voices that are often missing, particularly, are the voices of Black women, but women of color at large. It's typically led by our brothers, and sometimes even led by white men in particular. And so at Fuller Youth Institute, we took the moment to have 3 incredible women of color authors, leaders, and theologians be able to give this. And so it's a deep gift to the church, but it's also us living out our values, that representation and inclusion of the most marginalized voices matter. And in the world of talking about race and diversity, women of color continue to be a really minoritized voice. And so we're glad that there's 3 of them. And we would have loved more. And we hope that it just continues to happen time and time again. And it had its limitations. So
Thank you. Thanks for that explanation. Now, this season, we're going to be taking a page from your book, again, talking about race with teenagers. And I actually have a favorite section that you guys have. It's in every chapter of your book. And this section is called Language to Swap. It's where you give us helpful words or phrases to replace like other language. Because sometimes, while well-meaning, sometimes it's not helpful for people to say certain things. Like, instead of saying, your name is too hard to pronounce, you could say, help me practice saying your name correctly, right? Because if people can say Timothy Chalamet, you can say Giovanny Panginda.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
If I had to learn to say Kierkegaard and Shakespeare, you could say Guerra Aldana. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. So when talking about race or culture, what is a word or phrase you all have swapped? Like, Kat, how about you? Like, can you go first?
Sure, yeah. So I recently moved, well, I guess at this point, like a year ago. And I've moved a lot in my life, so of course I'm constantly meeting people. And, it's natural to want to ask someone, where are you from? And of course, when I ask someone that, I'm not like, no, where are you really from? But I feel like just in general, that's a good question to just remove out of my, repertoire, or remove out of my bank of questions when I meet people. And so I've sort of just switched that out with, oh, did you grow up here? Or, are you from this part of town? Or, just to avoid anything that might seem like, kind of like how you said, people don't always have the worst intentions, right? But just to not make it seem like if I'm questioning where someone is, quote unquote, really from, although, that's definitely not my intention, but I don't ever want to put that, make someone feel that way. So I just kind of replace that with, hey, did you grow up locally, or did you grow up in the city, or So that's something that I've definitely switched in how I speak or interact with folks.
And how about you, Jen?
Yeah, that's a really good one, Kat. I'm going to be thinking about how I can swap that one out. So thanks for that example. For me, it's not something that we overtly talk about in the toolkit, in this talking about race with teenagers guide, but it's something that came up in a conversation as I was presenting, and I continue to use the example, like, what was your tribe? Or I've heard it often like referred to, who are your people? It's another way to say people or community, but it was in this tribal language, and someone just gently pulled me aside and said, it's not a helpful thing to have somebody who is not from a Native American and in a Native background to be using that language, because that is, like, tribes are actually not just like communities, but there are really important, there's an important history of them in the United States. And in the moment she said that, there was just a layer of, oh, I see it now. Yeah, yes, I see it now. And so that's language that I've swapped. So any language that I've used, like, let's have a powwow, or who's your tribe? Those are the 2 that come to mind that I used more often, that I've tried to swap for, who do you call family, or who's your community, or can we have a conversation about that? Let's have a moment of reflection together. So to not take something that's actually ceremonial and important and unique to the Native American reality in the United States, and to co-opt that, to just have a shorthand for something that does not reflect the culture that I grew up with. So I'm still learning about how all these things, and I'm still finding language to swap, which I'm grateful for. So.
And how about you, Ahren?
So first of all, I just got married in February, which some people see that my last name was Samuel and it's now Martinez. So that's why.
Congratulations.
This girl. Thank you. Thank you. And my husband is wonderful and he's amazing and he is from Mexico. And I've always loved Latino culture, Mexican culture and everything. But I think I've been learning so much more about kind of the diaspora of the Latino culture and what words to and to not use. Like I've learned so much too from my sisters too about this, but especially from my husband, you know, him being from Mexico and being also considering himself as Chicano in the Chicano culture and would much rather be referred to in those terms, and hearing the term Hispanic is not a welcome term in the community. And really learning about the different words and terminology to use and being more intentional about that in my conversations, not just with him, but with my you know, my family, my new family and everything, and just being more intentional about my language and what is honoring to Latino people and to my husband and everyone. I'm just continually learning and also learning about my own native roots within my family as well. So just really learning how to be more intentional and learning the history and the way words have been used to harm people. And just it's a continued journey, like Jen said. So that's some of my language that I've been swapping and just being more intentional about.
I love that. I am actually learning about not assuming certain things about people, which actually I learned from one of your chapters. So there's a chapter where the language swap is like, instead of saying, "Oh, I bet you were raised on kimchi," right? So instead of saying that, say, "What did you like to eat growing up?" Because that literally happened to me one day when I discovered this new friend of mine. Although he was Korean, he was actually raised pretty much predominantly in Argentina. So he felt he was more Argentinian than Korean. So he's like, actually, I like empanadas. I grew up on empanadas. And I was like, what? Tell me your story. That's so interesting, you know? So learning to not assume things about people and just letting them share the stories that they want to share. So, yeah. If you want to read more about the original language to swap ideas, you can actually find them in the Ministry Toolkit, Talking About Race with Teenagers. It's linked in our show notes. You can find us, the Fuller Youth Institute, on social media for more content and videos and to stay up to date on all the latest research we're doing. Thanks so much for listening. This was such a great conversation filled with practical ideas. And there's just so much more to talk about with these authors. So be sure to tune in to the next episode. And finally, here is one final thought from a young person.
I definitely do wonder, why is it hard to reach out to people about race? It is something I do think about because we talk about it and it's in the media, but it's not something that you can just bring up anytime. And I also wonder, I guess, why has it gone on for so long? I would love to ask an adult this question and have a proper answer as to why it's still going. And I think definitely it ties back to historic moments, imperialism in the mid 1800s. But I do wonder why governments and such don't change the culture. It gives you the sense that somebody higher up who's never actually experienced it is talking about it. But you have to really get down to the level of who you're talking to about. If you talking to somebody that has had many racial struggles in the past, you need to get on their level. You need to understand how frustrating that is, how disappointing it can be to be set back just because of your race.